Welcome to the Empowered Team Podcast. I am your host, Kari Schneider, and today we're talking all about the self-talk, baby. Oh, the good stuff about self-talk. You know, when you're going through the day and you realize that you've got this little inner voice going, "Oh, I can do it later," or "I'll take care of that later," or "Oh, this really sucks." That self-talk. Well, we're going to look at what it does and how we can really use it to benefit us, benefit what's going to happen next. Ooh, here we go. So what is self-talk anyway? Well, first of all, here's how this topic came up. 8 weeks ago, I dropped a podcast all about the champion versus the devil's advocate. So challenge it versus champion it. And really what that's all about is self-talk. It's that kind of devil on the shoulder versus the angel on the shoulder, if you see in the old cartoons. And you've got this inner critic telling you why this is a problem and why it won't work and why whatever. And then you've got this other voice that goes and says, "You've got this, we can do it." So it's those two. And when I did that podcast, it prompted a few questions and had people kind of look at that. Well, really what it is it's self-talk. And then 6 weeks ago, we went into the topic in our mastermind into coaching about procrastination. And when I did the research on procrastination, it turns out that self-talk really contributes to procrastination. In fact, if you've got critical self-talk, it increases your likelihood of procrastinating by 25%. And when I started to learn this, I thought, you know what? Let's just do a podcast on self-talk specifically. So this is that stuff, like I said, when you are hearing that voice in your head that says, "Oh, well, we can just wait on this," or "I'm not any good at this, I suck at this," or "this is going to fail." That is all self-talk. And the mistake we often make is that we believe those thoughts, and it really impairs our emotional state and potentially our actions. So here we go. There's a researcher that I used in the procrastination talks. Fuchsia Sirois, Sirois. And she's the one that discovered that the more the critical self-talk is, the more it leads to procrastination. And then there's a researcher named Kristin Neff, and she's fantastic on self-compassion work. But what happens when you have a self-talk that's more compassionate, then there's greater motivation, greater resilience. So today, we're going to explore how to even hear your self-talk, because I could be talking about this and you're going, "I don't know what voice you're talking about." Trust me, it's there. You may not just be able to hear it. So we want to be able to hear that self-talk, shift it, and then make it our greatest ally so that we are more productive, we are more compassionate, we are more aware, instead of being always critical and not even realize we're doing it. So this is why it matters. This is why we really want to not just let this go below the radar. It's the running commentary. When this is a running commentary in your mind, it can be loud and obvious. You hear a strong voice in your head, but sometimes it's subtle. It's almost invisible. And what happens is it affects us in this really kind of death by a thousand cuts, if you may. There's these small negative comments, negative thoughts. You don't even really realize they're happening. And then you wonder why you feel so crummy or so disenchanted with whatever you were interested in. So defined simply, it is that running commentary, but it's not just thoughts. It's thoughts towards yourself. And when we keep having thoughts towards ourselves, whether they're positive or negative, it shapes our emotional state, which then shapes our behavior. So if we have critical self-talk, the way it affects our behavior, it can turn into avoidance, procrastination, and even a shame spiral. And that can be really hard. So this critical self-talk isn't as innocuous as it might seem. It turns into something that affects our whole life, our whole day even, but then our whole life and our day-to-day life creates our entire life. When we step into the self-talk that looks compassionate or encouraging, then we tend to create an environment of courage, small steps, persistence, resilience. And that too, from a day-to-day standpoint, creates our entire life. So the benefit for you, when you think about self-talk, why would I even bother with this? The benefit for you is that when you master self-talk, you master your ability to take action. You master your ability to follow through. Why? Because you've mastered your own emotional state. You're not allowing your self-talk to run the show when you can't even hear what's really going on. The researchers, if you want to dive into this a little bit more, there's fantastic researchers. One of them is Kristin Neff. As I mentioned, she's a self-compassion person, and she sees the greater resilience. Another one is Timothy Pychyl, Pychyl. And what he looks at is how much critical self-talk drives procrastination and drives avoidance. Another one is Ethan Kross, and the book is Chatter. And this one is a really good one. We're going to talk about this in our techniques and how we distance ourselves, because the critical self-talk is still going to happen. So how do we distance ourselves from it and really hear it for what it is versus become what the result is, the emotional state, the actions? We don't want to succumb to that. And then another one is Tasha Eurich. And this one is that this one's interesting, and I want to share this before we go into how to hear the self-talk, because this one is that 80%, in her research, 80% of people think they're self-aware, but in reality, only 10 to 15% are truly aware of themselves. So most self-talk slips below the radar. It's really in this unconscious zone instead of this subconscious zone or conscious zone. And we want to be able to hear it. So most self-talk is happening beneath our awareness. How do we even start to hear it? Let's take a look at that. We want to watch for certain clues. The clues that we're looking for specifically are behavioral, emotional, and physical. And if we can narrow them down into those zones, it's so much easier to find what we may not have been hearing. The first thing, if we want to find this self-talk and we're looking for the clues, the behaviors that tend to go with critical self-talk are similar to procrastination, hesitation, perfectionism, avoidance. Those are all the behaviors that come from critical self-talk. When we're cutting ourselves down, we think poorly of ourselves, whether you can hear it or not, but look for those actions. When those actions are there, there's some critical or negative self-talk behind it. So as long as you see the signs, you can start to look for, well, what was I thinking behind that? What was I saying to myself behind the scenes? Or what was I believing and then saying towards myself unknowingly? The second one is emotional cues. Now, the emotions you might be feeling are things like dread, shame, frustration, a feeling of failure. Those emotional states are typically the result of some critical self-talk, some negative self-talk. Now, some body cues you might notice. This is where you might feel tightness in the chest. You might feel kind of a tension or a sinking in the stomach, tightness in the jaw or the neck or the base of the skull. That tension is coming from some of that negative self-talk, some of the emotional states that are in our bodies. Remember that your body, the language of the body is emotion. So when something is happening with the body, whether it's a tense jaw or a tight shoulder, it's typically coming from the emotion that we've had, again, whether we're aware of it or not. So if you're really not aware of the emotional state or some of the behaviors, take a look at what your body is showing. Where is it always tight? Where do you feel like you've got extra tension right now? So take a moment in this time during this podcast, if you're driving, you're sitting at your desk, whatever you're doing, washing the dishes, and do a self-check. Where am I tight? Is there a voice in my head saying something? So look for, what are the behaviors? What are the emotional clues? What are the body clues? And those are going to point to what the self-talk might be. Just notice it. You don't have to do anything down. You could write it down. You could just pay attention to it. Just notice it. Is it encouraging or is it critical? Is it kind of a voice that has your back? It's like your hype girl or your hype man. Or is it someone who's kind of cutting you down, just pointing out everything that's wrong, but never pointing towards a solution or towards what's going right? So take a look at that. Critical self-voice. You're lazy. You're never going to get this done. Versus something that's a little bit more compassionate. The flip side of that sounds like, okay, brother, this is hard, but one step will get me started. You got this. Totally different thing, very different feeling, very different action, very different outcome. Take a look at what's going on for you. All right, next stage we want to go into is, how do we shift self-talk? So we've looked at what self-talk is, how we hear our self-talk, and now how do we shift this self-talk? Why do we want to do this? It's going to yield the benefits that we want in our lives. How we want to feel and how we want to show up. It starts with what we're saying to ourselves. So now that we can hear it because we've looked at the clues, we've followed the breadcrumbs, and then we can see, oh, looks like I've got some negative self-talk because I feel the tension all the time when I go swimming. How? And what am I hearing? I'm not hearing, yes, this is going to be awesome. I know swimming's hard for me, but you got this. You're doing something great for yourself. You're challenging yourself. It's going to be great. No, I'm feeling the tension because it's sounding something like, you suck at swimming. Come on. Like, why can't you do this why are you never getting any better? What's wrong with, like, you can't seem to get, you seem to be working so hard, but nothing's happening. So which voice is it? If you follow the breadcrumbs, you will find it. So now how do we shift it? Because we want to shift it because this is the zone that's in our complete control. Remember, we've talked about our realms of control. Some control, complete control, no control. Our self-talk is in our complete control, but it doesn't feel like it is initially. The reason it doesn't feel like it is because it's been going on for so long, is so automated that it's kind of flying below the radar. You don't want that to happen. And yet, all we really need to do is inject some self-talk that's encouraging or positive or compassionate. And when we do that, we can only think one thought at a time. It seems like we're thinking a million thoughts at once, but we're not. We're thinking them very, very fast. And in fact, I don't even call it thinking. It's not conscious. It's not intentional. Then I call it thoughting. And all these thoughts are coming boom, 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 boom. And if it's a self-talk thought that's negative, it's going to be pulling you back. So we want it to be something that pulls you forward or propels you into what you really want. So how do we do that? You don't even have to catch the negative all the time. You just need to create the positive. And when you do that, that shifts everything. So don't get so worried if you can't hear what the self-talk is and you notice all this negative behavior, procrastination or avoidance or whatever it is, and you're like, I can't hear what it is and how am I ever going to find it? Well, fine. Let's say you can't find it. So here's what you do. You start creating what you want. You create the voice that you want to hear from. That's different. That can make the shift. That can make the difference. That's huge. I remember when I was working with national teams all of the time. It consumed my entire life, and I did this for a very long time. And in my space, in my zone, in my queendom, whatever you want to call it, when people entered that world and things got really tough, I'm talking, we worked so hard that there was many a breakdown. People either didn't time their eating right and needed to vomit, or they may be crying, having an emotional breakdown, something like that. And yet everybody wanted to be there. Everybody was driven, but the work was very, very hard. And there were those occasional breakdowns. But there was a rule in there, and someone had backed me up. One of the players of the men's national volleyball team basically backed me up because one day I called them out so hard because they were whining and they were complaining. And it wasn't well-founded. There's a difference between a relevant need to express what is going on for them in a constructive manner and flat out complaining. And this person was flat out complaining, and I called them out on it. And the next day, they had pulled themselves together. They came back with a jar, and it was a fine jar. It was a jar for people getting fined. They had to put $1 or $2 in there every time they complained, they whined, they did anything that was not constructive towards the common goal, which is qualifying for an Olympics. So there was the wine jar. And all that was an example of self-talk that came out of the mouth. Now, so much of your self-talk, I promise you, is not getting out of your mouth. But I want to point to the rule. The rule was, we're not going to be saying, I can't in my space. And when I backed that up, other people got on board because they realized how constructive it was. That it was not going to work to have national team players complaining out loud and affecting other people and affecting themselves and draining the energy from the coaching that I wanted to do to make something positive happen. So they pulled themselves together. Fine jar was created. But the point here is that I created an environment where there wasn't a welcome space for I can't. There was not an open space for this sucks. There was not a welcoming for I feel like crap. We could talk about where everybody was at, but in a constructive manner. So, where I saw this more recently is when I volunteered for my daughter's her volleyball team and doing some of their strength and conditioning. Now, they were young, 14-year-olds, not new to physical conditioning. And some of them had done a few things and were a little more in that go-getter space, and others were in a space of, I can't. So I brought that same rule from the national team because why would I lower my standard for 14-year-old female volleyball teams versus the standard I had for a national men's volleyball team and a national women's volleyball team looking to qualify for the Olympics? Why would I change the rule for a club 14-year-old volleyball team? I didn't, and I wouldn't. So the same rule applied. You're not going to say I can't in here to affect yourself and affect everyone else. And maybe nobody's ever told you that before, but that's just my rule. And so they started to catch each other really quickly because I may have said, okay, we're all going to do some jumps. Every time someone said it, I may have, and I would do it with them. I had no problem having all of us do it. So immediately they started catching themselves and going, okay. They'd even get to the point where someone would say it just out of habit. I can't do this. And then quickly realize they said it and catch themselves and say, yet. And then other people's like, you're on this, you're trying. It started to encourage each other even. So here are some reframing of critical phrases. Notice how all I did was I can't do this, and they added yet. That's how they saved themselves from succumbing to the I can't and also having to do a few jumps. So here are a few that you might like. I can't do this turns into I can do the first step. I can try. I've got this. How about I always fail? That's a pretty catastrophic self-talk. I always fail can turn into, well, I've succeeded before. I can try again. Who says I'm going to fail at this? Says who? Another one that's so powerful, and this is the researcher, what was his name? I'm blanking on his research. It's the Ethan Kross. Ethan Kross, it's the third person. It's speaking to yourself instead of I, but in your own name. And when you say something like, you've got this, James. You can do it, Joe. You've got this, Jamie. One step at a time. Speaking to yourself in your own name creates the distance, and it also creates more of an attention on it. So it becomes less subconscious or unconscious and more conscious because you've used your name towards yourself. It sounds like someone else talking to you. Maybe it's that voice you needed to hear from someone you really admire or respect, and you hear them saying your voice. We really pull it up into the conscious instead of keeping it low into the unconscious. It's a really, really good thing. So you've got that thing, the name, and then some sort of encouraging thing. Here's another way to shift the self-talk, and this is the step-by-step, and it's from researcher Kristin Neff. And what it sounds like is, first of all, I'm gonna say it in Kristin Neff's voice, the step-by-step, and then I'm gonna say it in mine, because mine is very different. And I want to encourage you to do the same, because if you only say it in the perfect step-by-step style, and it's not you, guess what? Your brain doesn't resonate with it, doesn't believe it, and it just stuffs it away, and you go back to your unconscious or your own habitual dialogue. So this is what Kristin Neff would say. She would say, acknowledge this is hard. So you start with saying, this is hard. Then you say, you normalize it. Okay, struggle is a human thing. Struggle is part of being human. And then you are encouraging. So you start with the acknowledgement, then the normalizing, and then the encouraging. I can be kind to myself right now. I can be kind to myself right now. So Kristin Neff's are these. This is hard. Struggle is part of being human. I can be kind to myself right now. Now, I could say those things, but that's not how I speak. And that's not how I speak to myself. So if that were me and I'm looking to acknowledge, normalize, and encourage, it might sound like this. This sucks. I can't stand this right now. That's the acknowledgement. The normalizing might sound for me like, okay, I know that this is the 50-50 part of life. 50 is positive, 50 is negative. This is just the sucky part of life. That's how I might speak to myself. And then what I would say is something like, I've got this. I've done much harder things before. I can do this. That's how I would speak to myself. So go ahead and use the formula that the researcher has created that is the acknowledging and normalizing and encouraging. This is hard. Struggle is part of being human. I can be kind to myself right now. But translate it into your voice so it works for you. So it actually is meaningful for you. It's not just something that blah, 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 and then you go back to being self-critical and in the suck. But actually put it into what you would say to someone you really, really care about, or someone you really admire who's a fantastic coach would say to you. Come on, girl, you got this. You can crush this right now. Whatever it is, your voice. Okay, so we're going to go back just to remind you, just to recap really quickly. Remember that we want to understand what self-talk is. These are your thoughts at yourself, and they're not really conscious, intentional ones. There's a lot of autopilot, a lot of habitual. Being able to master them quite literally translates into being able to master your actions, master your emotional state, and thereby over and over again, you master your life. This is a big, big step, a huge, incredible skill. Why this matters is because it quite literally shapes your life. Day to day shapes your life. Now, how we started to hear ourselves talk, we looked at the behavioral clues, we looked at the emotional cues, and we looked at the physical cues of the body. And then shifting the self-talk, we acknowledge what is happening. We take a look at normalizing what is happening, and then we encourage ourselves to go forward in whatever your language is, in whatever your voice is. So right now, you could be pushed into avoidance, 25% more of it, more procrastination of it if you're critical talking to yourself, or you can use your self-talk to pull you forward with encouragement, to pull you forward into new heights, into new accomplishments, into things that light you up. And I'm pretty sure that's what you want. I'm pretty sure that's who you are, because you're up to big things. Keep going. Keep getting after it. This week, I challenge you challenge yourself. Never mind me challenging you. You challenge yourself to take a look at one of those critical phrases in your life that keeps coming up over and over and over in your head, challenge yourself. Do you still want that one? Do you want it to be different? Do you want it to work for you instead of against you? Take a look. And if there's somebody in your life who could use this little blurb for their self-talk, go ahead and share. I hope it makes a big difference. Go and get it. Crush it today. Crush it this week.